Don't stop.
Hi, thanks so much for joining me in the Everything and Anything in a Big Gay podcast. I'm your host, Zach Randall Friedman. And today, my guest, I'm going to tell you about in a moment, but is somebody that I was so thrilled to get a yes back from. And I'm going to tell you all about him in 1 minute. But first, I want to kind of lead with, I have been doing some my own promotion for my podcast. I've been going on some other podcasts and talking about my show. And I went on to a couple of AM radio shows over the past month or so, and it's fun. I mean, I like interviewing people more than I liked being interviewed, but some of these shows, it was just like a conversation. It was really fun, and I liked the people that I was talking with. But I got similar questions, and it made me really kind of stop and pause for a moment just to kind of think about what, the question is, you're no longer working in a corporate job. You're doing your podcast full time. What are some things that you have learned from this podcast? And it made me really kind of think about it. And then today I did an interview, and that question kind of got thrown at me again from the person I was interviewing. Like, what have you learned the most from doing this podcast? And the first thing I always kind of bring up is that I now understand transgender people. I understand the struggles that they went through, and I understand how fucking brave they are to be their authentic self. Like, I am such an ally for transgender people, and I did not really think about it before this podcast. I did not understand it at all. And it didn't scare me, and I wasn't transphobic by any means, but I just it wasn't part of what I was thinking. And now I think about transgender people as part of my community because I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community. So that's one major thing that I have, and that's changed. And then the other thing that has changed me that I talk a lot about is whenever we died, I always said, okay, we're dead. That's it. You're cremated or buried or whatever they want to do with your body. And that's it. Like, life's over. And I now realize that there is reincarnation and that there is a whole nother piece where you continue on, whether you call it spirit or energy or whatever you want to talk about. But this podcast has also kind of taught me to think outside of the box and to think about things differently. What happens, really daily? Are we in a simulation? I love seeing all these videos and talking with these guests where we could be in a simulation and that's their theory. So it's called a simulation theory. Or, we could be in a parallel universe doing something different and we're different dimensions and all this. So I love thinking about all those things now. It just really makes my mind, not wonder, but just, I think it's just good to it makes me think that we're somewhere, it's different. Our world is different than really probably what we all think it really is at the end of the day. And who knows, maybe we do just die and you're put into the ground or you're cremated and then it's all over. I don't think that anymore because of the people I've spoken to and the experience that I've had since doing this podcast. I'm 98% sure that that's not all that happens. And my guest today's name is Brendan Murphy, and we go deep into some things. And I literally could have spent another 4 hours speaking with Brendan because he is so interesting. His thought process and the research that he has done on everything that he talks about today is fascinating. He's one of those just interesting people. One of those people that I feel like if I was his day-to-day friend, I would drive him insane by asking him so many questions because I really want to know what his thinking is on so many things. And so I think he'd be like, listen, I could be your friend, Zach, but stop asking me about what happens in the conscious mind. And I think he'd be like, just stop. Because I could spend months with him asking him questions and probably still not be satisfied and have all the answers that I want. And he's still trying to figure things out too. But whenever I reached out to Brendan, and he said yes, I'm like, wow, this is like another level of people. And I was just so thankful. So I hope you enjoyed this interview I did with Brendan Murphy as much as I enjoyed speaking with him, because he's really fantastic. So check out all his information in the link in this video or podcast, however you're listening to it, and reach out to him and learn more about him, because he's fascinating. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy the episode. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me in the Everything and Anything and a Bit Gay podcast. Today, I have a guest that I have been looking forward to for such a long time to speak with, and I'm really happy to say Brendan Murphy is here, and we're going to have a really amazing, unique conversation. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Zach. Appreciate it.
So there are so many ways that there's so many questions. I could talk with you probably for like 6 weeks and like still not be satisfied, because you've done so much amazing work, and there's so many things that you have done research on over the last, was it 23 years? Is that how long you've done research on? And that I think is just so many people are interested in this. So first, I want to just kind of like, if you could give my audience an idea of a high level of what the research is that you've done over the past 23 years, just to kind of, if they don't know who you are, to give them an idea who you are.
Yeah, cool. I mean, basically my main interest has always been the nature of reality and consciousness. And, those two questions of, what are those things are really the same question I've found. So that's what I've basically been pursuing for the last 23 years.
And what got you interested in that? It was something that happened when you turned 20. Is that accurate? And it kind of got you more interested?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, my backstory is basically one day my brother, who is 3 years younger than me, came home from school. He was still in high school. I was, I think, just turned 20-ish at the time. And he came home and said, there was this guy who came to give a talk at school, and he was talking about this. He was supposed to talk about business. He was like an entrepreneur character, but he kept going off topic and talking about this amazing book that had, changed his life completely. And it was a book that's quite well known. It's called The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. And so I shelved that idea. I just sort of made a mental note, and I sat on it for about 6 months before I did anything about it. Eventually, I went and read that book, and it absolutely blew my mind. And so that was the beginning for me of this path. That was the trigger point.
Wow, that's amazing.
So yeah, from there, sorry, I realized that was like a very abridged version, but yeah, so from there I kind of started meditating. I started reading a lot. I had certain types of altered state of consciousness experiences, and that just locked it all in. And so yeah, there was no looking back.
And I know I watched other interviews that you've done, and people are always like, oh, did you do psychedelics to get there? And you don't. You really are just kind of like, you've learned to do this and meditate and get there on your own. Is that accurate?
Well, yeah, I mean, my first experience followed shortly after reading Talbot's book. And I think the reason that it happened spontaneously, I just tell people, they seem to think it's strange. I was lying on my bed just waiting to go to sleep. And suddenly I just found that I was a point of awareness in an infinite ocean of awareness or beingness, kind of raw beingness. And that was just a spontaneous thing, and a spontaneous infinity experience. And so that then kind of, spurred me to want to take up meditating and that kind of thing. And so I had other types of experiences just in meditation, which were more kind of controlled or sustained. And, that's what I like about like the contemplative traditions in, say, the Hindu traditions or Buddhist, is that they're not always looking for an external, how do I get there kind of thing. It's actually a cultivated skill. And so you're not reliant on an external to have the experience. And I've found that even though I've used a bunch of different, plant medicines and all sorts of things, the most profound experiences for me were actually that very first one. And I think even after that, the experiences I had in meditation just without any substances were still much more, in a way, more powerful for me. I don't particularly love being blasted out into, whatever kind of a state by a substance. I don't personally love it. I know people can have very amazing experiences. I've done, Bufo and, DMT and all sorts of stuff. But for me, it's just, I know from experience we can do this ourselves, and we can cultivate that as a skill. So, why not?
And are you teaching people how to do that?
No, not at all. I don't.
Would you want to?
No, I wouldn't even. I don't consider myself knowledgeable enough on that. That I would sit people down in a lesson and go, "Here's how you do it."
Yeah.
But, God knows there's endless sources of,
Yeah.
places they could go to find out.
Yeah. And we'll be right back. Okay, now back to the show. I mean, let's talk about NDEs for a minute because, you've studied thousands of these, right? And so to me, it sounds like when people are they see what the beginning of death is like and not necessarily like what it's going to be like once they get there, right? So what does that actually mean to you? Like, what do you think that they're actually kind of experiencing when this happens?
Yeah, it's hard to generalize because it's really a mixed bag. There are a lot of different types of experiences people have, and I would say that some of them are legitimate previews of the life to come, and so you have all sorts of journeys into other realms, journeys into someone finds themselves in a city, something that we recognize as kind of familiar relative to our day-to-day kind of earthly life. A lot of people have these. They go to some amazing transcendent city, a city made of crystal or light or something like that, and they may have interactions with other beings or people there. But then you have at the other end of the spectrum where it's sort of like maybe a lower resolution sort of experience, just like little glimpses of the other side, or someone has like a brief encounter with Auntie May who died 50 years ago, and they have this amazing sort of connection, but they're sent back and they're not allowed to proceed any further because their time's not up. And then then there's other categories of experience that are completely different, where people are in essentially something that is constructed from their memory, and it becomes this kind of virtual reality dreamscape, incredibly realistic virtual reality, like unbelievably convincing. And it's made up of their unintegrated psychological content. And there's a fantastic example of this, if I can think of the woman's name. She had an experience where Kathy McDaniel, I think it is, she had an experience of being put into a coma, induced into a coma. And this actually apparently happens quite a lot with people put into comas, is the consciousness becomes kind of effectively separated from the body. And so the consciousness, without having a chance to prepare for it or acclimate, it's suddenly disembodied. It's suddenly the physiological anchorage point is offline and it's done. And so now they're in a psychological reality, and it may or may not be very pleasant. Like in Kathy's experience, she went through a series of different types of stages. One of them was she encountered zombies that actually physically raped her. And she went through this ordeal, like a series of ordeals. And she realized after she came out of the coma and recovered and had time to think about it, and it was a horrendous ordeal before it eventually moved on to a pleasant encounter with her deceased husband. She realized that all of those unpleasant aspects of that journey were based on her own life experience. So it had been put together spontaneously by her psyche as an externalized environment, dreamscape, completely tangible and solid, and convincing and terrifying, which she then had to work through and process. So there's a spectrum of experiences.
Wow, that's amazing. Whenever you take a look, like you kind of step back and you take a look at all the NDEs that you looked at and the stories that you've heard and research and stuff, is there one thing in particular? I mean, that's a really good one that jumped out. But is there something that really jumps out to you that you're like, this changed the whole way I think about things?
In terms of NDEs?
Yeah. I know that's a big question.
It is, and it's such a huge field, and I've got to try to think of, okay, over the last 23 years, was there something? But I don't think that I can't really think of an NDE specifically, like one thing that has really kind of been game changing for me. I think the powerful thing about them is to see the volume of them and to see the patterns and the structural similarities between them. That's what impacts me rather than someone having a particular story. I will tell you one thing, actually. This just happened recently. I found a parallel between Eben Alexander's 2008 NDE. I don't know if you know Dr. Eben Alexander, the neurosurgeon. A neurosurgeon, I think he was. When he had his NDE, he was a hardcore materialist, like absolutely atheistic materialist. And he went into a coma situation, had a very profound experience, And one of the parts of his journey, he went into this realm where it was very beautiful. It was very kind of transcendent, earthly kind of environment. But in the air, he noticed this type of being that was, and for him, he couldn't label it. He couldn't come up with a name for it. And in his book, he says something like, the word angel was not quite enough for this being. It's not quite enough. It's something similar, but it's not. It's like a little bit above. It's just a step beyond that. And it was a being that was generating sound, like chant. This like amazing angelic chant that it would suffuse the environment with this sound, and it wasn't absorbing any kind of input. It was only like outputting into the environment. It wasn't like him like receiving information or vibrations or what have you. And that really struck him, and he described this thing in detail. And I only recently found out that Rudolf Steiner, in a 1904 lecture, described the exact same thing in the exact same type of environment. And Steiner, for those who don't know already, he was a polymath genius, clairvoyant as well. And so he was a seer. He was an initiate. He was a Rosicrucian. He was also something of a Christian. And he was quite a developed clairvoyant. And so he'd consciously been exploring these other realms, other states of being for a long time, and talking about it and educating people about it. And he actually described the same thing that Alexander was describing, the same type of realm. But in Steiner, he actually had a system. Obviously, being an esotericist, metaphysicist, he had a system. This realm, this particular layer, he called Lower Devakan. And he described it in the exact same way that Ibn Alexander did from his 2008 NDE. And the being in the air that Alexander was trying to explain and capture with words, Steiner described it as not an angel, but an archangel. And he described this thing in the exact same way. It only outputs sensory output. It does not receive. It makes these amazing, beautiful sounds that it fills the environment with. And so that actually blew me away. And it happened just very recently that I found that Steiner confirmation of Alexander's NDE. And that the detailed parallels there just blew me away. So that was a recent example where I can say, wow, this is one of the most powerful, because they're separated by 104 years. Yeah. Ibn Alexander had zero belief in any kind of non-physical post-mortem existence whatsoever.
Wow. Whenever people say, like skeptics come and say, oh, these are just NDEs are just brain hallucinations and stuff. But when you look at the data kind of across like all the cultures and the centuries and all the different religions and belief systems, I mean, there's an argument that's really against that. I mean, there's all this research that you're doing and a lot of other people are doing. I mean, what would you say to people that are saying that this is just a brain hallucination, or it's all in your mind? It's not real.
Well, I wouldn't say anything to them because they're generally not very open-minded. They're very dogmatic, those people, generally speaking. But the argument just doesn't withstand any kind of actual scrutiny, because, I mean, I just gave you an example of two NDEs that, should not, like, the parallels should not exist, especially coming from the mouth of an atheist. But, there are cases of people who have died and had, this conscious, very highly lucid experience of encountering somebody who had also died, maybe on the other side of the world, maybe far away, who they didn't know was dead, who they actually believed was alive and living and still, and, hunky-dory, everything's fine. Yeah. But they have, during the NDE, they encounter this person, and it may be a case of, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be alive, kind of thing. And then, when they're resuscitated and revived and recovered, they find out that person they encountered had died just before them or during the moment they were having their NDE.
Oh, wow.
So these cases are documented. There are many of them. And there's the all-time most powerful category of cases is the Peak and Darien one, where people encounter somebody who they didn't even know existed. For example, you might have had a sister who died during birth, and then, you're born 3 or 4 years later. Your parents decide not to tell you about it just yet because you're just a kid and they don't want to burden you with that. But then you have your own NDE and you experience an encounter with this, like maybe a little girl who says, hey, I'm your sister. You don't know me because we never met because I died during birth. And, they might give some additional bits and pieces of data. And then, lo and behold, when this person recovers and wakes up and talks about the NDE, their parents might be in shock. And I've got a couple of cases like this in the book too, where they're just absolutely flabbergasted because they didn't tell them about the child who died during birth. And those cases, those Pekingarian cases are numerous. There's many of them. So you can't explain that with a malfunctioning brain, a dying brain, hypoxia. Like none of the material, all of those explanations are desperate attempts by philosophical materialists to try to preserve materialism. That's all it is, and they just don't work.
Yeah. Can we just kind of bring in the reincarnation piece to this? Because I'll just kind of give you a little bit of background about myself. That I started this podcast like 2.5 years ago, and I kind of thought, when you die, you die. You're either cremated, buried, whatever happens, and then that's it. I no religion really. My grandparents were Southern Baptists. I didn't catch on with me at all. I was like opposite of what I wanted to do. My father, when I turned like 8 or 9, he's like, "Do you want to go to church still?" I said, "No, I'm done." And so that was it. I never believed in any of this religious piece. And I didn't believe in reincarnation either until I started doing this podcast and meeting with people. And I think the first time I really thought about it is whenever I met with a psychic medium on my podcast. And I think you did this too. I took a class for 1.5 years to be a psychic medium. And it changed my whole way of thinking about things, my whole way of thinking about what happens when you die. It made me want to look at people like you to see like what they're researching and what they're doing and what they think. And it just really opened my mind up. And then I also did, I'll tell you one more quick story, is that I did a past life regression hypnosis with a woman. And she took me back to 2 of my lives. Neither one of them I thought would ever be what my past life would have been like. I was a farmer in Kansas in the 1940s with a wife and 2 kids. Very not at all what I thought my life would have been. I thought it would have been something glamorous and amazing, like, I don't know, but not a farmer in Kansas. And the other one, actually, I don't think was even on this planet. It was somewhere else. So long story, I want to kind of bring back into the question is, what do you think reincarnation actually looks like when you kind of strip away all this religion and all this stuff that people have said? Like, what is your thoughts on reincarnation?
Yeah, I mean, I go into a lot of depth in the book around this. It's a huge topic. So, you have to look at it from a linear kind of a point of view, because that's kind of how reality works to us. When we're attached to our physical sensory system, and you have to kind of also acknowledge it from a non-linear point of view. And to me, it's a layered. There are layers to this, and there are layers in a sense. We have to use awkward terminology because that's just language, right? We're trying to capture non-physical consciousness concepts with words, and it's very awkward and clunky, but it's a layered thing. And I've got kind of a tiered structure of consciousness where, the different layers kind of interface and interact with each other. And, reincarnation can happen from a lower, like an earthbound condition, like somebody pops out of their body and they're just like, okay, I'm going straight back in. I don't care about anything else. I need to get back in a body. And that's like, some people have that kind of mentality. And so, from the lower kind of, you would say lower astral environment, very Earth-like environment, they just jump straight back in. And there's a lot of evidence for this kind of thing as well. Ian Stevenson and other researchers have shared, very, very powerful data around that, the evidence for reincarnation. And then, at another level, you find there are, well, again, that you can talk about astral planes, mental planes, causal planes. And, I explained all of this, but it's sort of like from any given level in the architecture, people could opt to, turn back towards the Earth life and take on a body again. It's really kind of a question of how deep they go into the post-mortem integration process, what options they're aware of having, which for many people, very little awareness around what their options are. So for those people, they might need some guidance and input and assistance, orientation. Robert Monroe talked about these orientation centers. Well, I'm forgetting the term now. I should not. Seen it 1,000 times. But I've laid all this out in detail. And so Robert Monroe was one of the famous OBE pioneers who went and explored these realms and found these orientation centers to welcome people into their post-mortem life and basically give them the rundown. Like, here are your options. What do you want to do? And so that is kind of like a terminal, like almost like an airport terminal kind of situation where people are coming into the Earth system and also leaving via that same kind of interface. And then, beyond that, you kind of get these like causal planes where people start to actually, and this comes up a lot in the regression literature, which kind of details this quite a lot, where people start to remember that they've had other lifetimes on Earth, and they become aware that they're involved in a very kind of big long-term process here in interacting with the Earth system on like an evolutionary kind of a journey, trying to garner as much experience as they possibly can, as many different modes of experience as they can. And basically it's from that level, the whole game is designed to give you as much opportunity for growth and development as possible from as many different angles as possible. So this is why people don't tend to reincarnate into the same exact local culture. Repeatedly, they tend to take on a very different situation in the next time around. But then, at a higher level, you have a more integrated state, which I just call, I have a few names for it, but one of them is just the oversoul level, where we are integrated into a collective entity, an identity multiplex made of, I would suggest many thousands of different people's identities that have come together in a sort of a shared, identity space. And from that level, that is a very different experience of reality. I mean, every layer that we've talked about is at that level. It's even more so. It's more abstract. There's really very little to do with our concept of space and time and form. That all kind of goes out the window. And so it's a very abstract, fluid kind of environment where people can, from that level, sort of go, oh, well, I might feel like, having a little journey as a 7th century, preacher in Europe somewhere. Or maybe I'll go into the 23rd century, and it's not a linear game from that level. It's just kind of like whatever the oversoul intelligence wants to architect as an experience or design. It can do that at that level, but lower down, it starts to look more linear and one serial, one lifetime, another lifetime, and so we make sense of it in different ways depending on where we're sort of standing in the architecture.
Just to jump back to the medium psychic thing, whenever you did that, did you really feel that you were able to kind of communicate with people that have gone to the other side?
Not personally, no. I went to a mediumship group for 2 years, so similar to you, from the age of 20 to 22. And by the time I had to stop going because life took a different turn, I was at the point, I didn't actually go for that. I didn't want to be a trance medium.
I was there. Okay.
I was there because I wanted to develop clairvoyance, and so that was my focus. Like I wanted to see, and didn't particularly care if entities, wanted to speak through me or any of that sort of stuff. Yeah. But the people there who were going, to the group as well, they were like, any minute now, because I could feel my sort of trance state just deepening gradually and deepening, and they would say, any minute now, someone's going to, talk through you, kind of thing. And that was kind of the point where I actually stopped going anyway. But my interest wasn't in that.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. And we'll be right back. Okay, and now back to the show. I've seen online where you talked about this a little bit about people remember their like lives and stuff. I've seen this one particular video that I think it was from a documentary that really struck me, is where there was like kids a lot of times remember past lives, right? And this one kid, I think he was living in America, remembered this whole life. His family was in another country. They looked up this person's name. They ended up taking this kid over to this village somewhere. I think it was in Eastern Europe. The kid knew exactly where his home was, walked in to these people's home or this restaurant or whatever they were at, and he knew the person's name. Like he knew all this stuff about them. He didn't remember it for very long, like after the fact. Like he didn't keep having more memories. It kind of like faded. But I just think have you kind of heard of things like that? Because I think it's so remarkable that certain kids or some kids can actually just have these memories and they can just, I guess they slowly fade. But I'm just wondering like why some have it and others don't.
Yeah, it's interesting. Ian Stevenson found a lot of cases like that. A lot of his case studies were exactly what you just described. And I think that a lot of it looks like for those kids where they do feel like they actually belong in this other life, this other family, from his research in particular, it looks like those are the people who quite often died violently or died before their time. So they didn't, and then from there they often just try to reincarnate back into Earth life as quickly as possible. So you get these reports of people hanging out around the family home or hanging out in some location that was familiar to them and just kind of waiting for an opportunity to jump into somebody's womb to be reborn. But yeah, what you described is pretty widely attested and documented, and it's, I think, largely because those souls, for want of a better word, have left the body and not really gone deeper into the post-mortem integration process. So they come back with it. And, in terms of esoteric theory, if let's say you reincarnate immediately, you're not interested in the afterlife whatsoever, you just want to get back in a body. So you're coming back with the same psychological, emotional configuration that you had. You have the same emotional body, you have the same mental body. So essentially your mind and your emotions are the same. You're the same personality, just adopting a different body. Whereas if you go deeper into the post-mortem process, you can enter into the planes where we're supposed to go, really, like the causal planes, where we drop the emotional astral body, we drop the mental body, and then from there we're operating at that causal level where you can kind of oversee the process of the lifetimes, the developmental arc. And then from there, if you decide, well, I want to go back into Earth life and do such and such, at that point, as you descend back into the lower planes, you are generating new mental bodies, new emotional astral bodies. So the personality configuration is going to be completely, it should be completely different as opposed to, what we just described. So I think that's kind of the difference a lot of the time.
Do you think we come back with the same people every time we come back?
Yeah, it looks like there's kind of you have a cast of intimate associates who we tend to return with in different guises, different roles for sure. There's a lot of there's a lot of evidence and testimony around that for sure.
So after your kind of the 23 years of research that you've done, is there something that you have completely changed your mind about, like over the course of like something that you thought, at the beginning of this 23-year journey, you thought one thing? Obviously, you've learned a lot and you've probably changed your mind about 1,000 things, but is there one thing that really like you did a complete 180?
Man, I can't think of one off the top of my head. It's hard to name something. The thing with my journey was started from a point of essentially like mysticism or, having mystical experiences. So I was coming from a place of, basically like monistic idealism or, something adjacent to that. Like my point of view at that point was, well, the only thing that's real is consciousness. And that's basically it. So within that container of infinite consciousness, we have endless possibilities. We have infinity in front of us. And so, that fundamental kind of premise has never shifted for me. I've just managed to kind of flesh out the details a lot since then. It's really hard to actually think of something where I got really wrong and just had a complete 180 on. But there are certain things that have had my interest for a long time that maybe I wasn't clear on, and something that bothered me. Like in the book, I've got many points of things that I explained that I've only explained it because it was something that bothered me for a while because I couldn't. It was like, well, this thing here says this, but these people here say this, and how can they both be kind of true at the same time? And so I'm trying to solve these puzzles, and that has been a really interesting process where because I've stuck with certain things like the trying to untangle the knot for so long. I've learned things that I otherwise wouldn't have along the way, which have often been pretty mind blowing.
So if consciousness kind of continues after death, like what do you think is actually determines like where we go and what we experience next? Like, are we selecting that ourselves, or is this like source, a bigger source, like you were talking about, that collective? Is that kind of helping us determine? Like, what do you think happens?
I would say first and foremost is the individual, like psychological configuration of somebody. But that's really it, because when you take away the body, the only thing that's left is the psyche. And so, the significance of that, I think, is still quite underappreciated. So when you when your physical body stops working, the only thing left for you is a mentally generated environment, essentially, or some kind of consciousness generated, rendered environment. So from there, it's a matter of, well, what do you believe? What have you unconsciously held as true? What kind of emotional stuff have you not worked through and integrated? What kind of healing work have you done or not done? Because that's ultimately the state of your psyche, which then becomes your externalized kind of environment, your operating environment. And there's so many case studies that attest to that. So that's really the beginning of the answer to that particular question.
So, and I always wonder if like it's just my algorithm on the internet and social media where I'm seeing these things that we're talking about more. But do you feel like there is like a shift in the overall world or society that people are starting to say, oh yeah, religion doesn't actually make sense. Like if you think about it, like there's actually not a heaven or a hell actually. Or yeah, maybe reincarnation is real, or there's more than just us. And I also think, and just to get a little like way out there, with the whole like alien conspiracy stuff that people have, or the disclosure day, I should say, not conspiracy, but like the disclosure day they're talking about that's coming up. Like a lot of people are talking about aliens with the 3-eye atlas and like all this stuff. And people, I feel like, are really opened up their minds more. Do you see that as well too? Like there's like a shift in just the world or the culture? So just because because I'm interested in it, my algorithm is showing me that.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know when we live in these algorithm realities, but yeah, I think so. I think that's what's happening for sure. Really, that's my personal opinion is people are becoming increasingly curious about things and not so dogmatically attached to certain ideas. So yeah, I think the openness it looks to me anyway like it's higher than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Which is really good because we need it badly.
We do.
And the thing I add to that is, well, we just need to be open, but not so open that our discernment falls out.
Yeah. So like you're saying that so heaven and hell are not places. They're a state of consciousness that that we generate based on who we are in some ways. So let's take Hitler for example. What do you think happened to Hitler whenever he died? Like, do you think there was some punishment for him? Or is there no internal judgment? And this was just like a life. This is something that he was part of his reincarnation experience that he had to experience, or part of his journey.
Well, there's a few questions in there. So there's zero evidence for any kind of imposed punishment. That's the first thing. I mean, zero. People, who have a religious mindset might want to believe that there is, but believing something is not the same as being able to prove it.
Yeah.
So, there is no imposed punishment. The suffering that people experience is due to the internal state of their mind. And so for someone who is a really, psychopathic, violent, predatory kind of an individual, they are likely to end up in a very kind of a hellish kind of a, dreamscape environment. And what also happens is there's a collective aspect to it as well, because like attracts like. So when you have people who are highly criminal, very deviant, sadistic or what have you, they end up in their own hellscapes together. So they end up with these, social structures and, living in cities where the same kind of criminal mind has been drawn to, in a high concentration. So, I imagine, and I don't know about him in particular, but I imagine that he would have ended up in some kind of a hellscape. And, because of what I know of his, personality type, I would say he probably had a lot of time. He's probably had a long time lingering in some, very unpleasant kind of environments. But maybe at the same time, there's always help or people or souls, spirits who are trying to break through to people to say, hey, you don't have to be doing this. You don't have to be in this hellhole.
Yeah.
There's another way, there are other options kind of thing. So we have these, and they've been referred to with numerous names, the Mercy Band of helpers, all sorts of, basically the same idea of these spirits that are organized, they're highly organized. I wish we could get this organized on the physical plane. But they basically, their job is to go and try to intervene in people's situations where they're stuck in a hellscape or, in a personal isolation, self-imposed, and just kind of be like, hey, just give them a friendly nudge, like, would you like to see something different, or to go into a belief system territory, which is Monroe's term, where people who have strong religious beliefs have gathered together, the same mentality. There's a Baptist heaven, there's various, all the heavens for all the different beliefs, and they go in and sort of try to find somebody whose mind has started to entertain some doubts about their belief system, the place that they inhabit, and maybe they're starting to think, oh, hang on a second, this doesn't really add up, and why is the priest or the pastor telling us things, making promises, and they're not coming true? And what are we waiting here for? So they try to find someone whose mind has just started to open up a little bit and be like, hey, actually, you're not really supposed to be here. There's all this other stuff waiting for you. And so there's, we can't really predict exactly what someone might experience, but it's definitely governed by their internal psychological wiring at the point of death. So for someone very narrow-minded, very, materialist, they'll probably be unconscious, maybe just blank, flat unconsciousness, because if you don't believe you can exist after the body drops, then, what kind of experience can you have? So a lot of people may just sleep through it. Who knows? I don't know what happened to Adolf, but he had a lot to work through.
Yeah, he did. Just to switch gears a little bit, a lot of people talk about simulation theory. And what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I get into that a lot. I have my own frame around it in the book because it kind of makes sense. And actually what I found really interesting in my putting that book together was the extent to which computing and IT metaphors and analogies can be applied to the consciousness system, the postmortem structure. That actually kind of blew me away. The more I went into it and realized how well it maps, but only as analogies and metaphors. There's no, and I don't believe at all that we're trapped in a computer or any kind of like a physical structure. And the thing with that kind of thinking is that it just invites an infinite regress. There's no way out. If you believe that you're trapped in a computer game, well, you can get out of the game, but you just find yourself trapped in a different part of the machine kind of thing. Yeah. So it's really unhelpful. And I see it as being a little bit naive as well. Like for people who've had very, very, like high level altered states, mystical experiences, I don't think they would take that particularly seriously. But there's kind of a grain of truth in it, in the sense that, well, reality, like what we think of as reality, is not quite actually what it seems to be. Like it's kind of a simulated environment, but it's generated from a field of consciousness, not by a computer.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that people just want that to be true? So I think that like Grand Theft Auto and things like that, there was a guy that I was watching online there, he was saying, it's like we're in a Grand Theft Auto game and, like you could switch to another game and stuff. So I think people just, I mean, obviously there was no research on what this guy was doing. I think he was just saying what he thought, but I just love some of these theories that people come up with where they really think that we're sitting here in an alien video game and some alien is playing all of us. So I think it made me think, but I think some of these theories are just hysterical.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like the conclusions that they've reached, or their operating premises, their foundational premises, are not quite right. But there's, it's like they're kind of moving in the right direction, just not quite. It's not quite landing for them. It's a low resolution kind of a take on it, if you ask me.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Okay, now back to the show. When you spoke with Raymond Moody, did he ever tell you anything off the record that he wouldn't say publicly, and something that maybe shifted how you thought?
No, the video stopped when I finished the interview, so there was no kind of like.
Oh, there was no off the record stuff. Okay.
No, there was none of that. It was, and Paul was there with him. No, I mean Raymond's kind of, he's the OG. He's the guy who's sort of started it all and put it all on the map. Like I respect everything he's done, and I also feel like the OGs, the guys who were there in the 70s and the 80s, they have done a phenomenal job of like unearthing and surfacing really critical foundational data for us to be able to look at. But what none of them have done is really build a framework out of it, like a coherent metaphysical framework to make sense of that data, if that makes sense. So they're saying they're producing really valid insights, like the fact that we can't explain NDEs by the dying brain hypothesis and all of this kind of stuff. Like these guys have covered that to the nth degree, and they've decimated the materialists' kind of arguments. But there's now what I'm trying to do is move the whole kind of conversation forward and give like a structured framework which actually contextualizes, for example, the NDE data and the reincarnation data, and actually shows some of the process and the reasons and the rules and the laws and why things happen the way that they do, rather than just repeating the same stuff. Like, here's a cool NDE story, but like what happens when we start actually going a bit deeper to the process underlying it and the rules underlying it? That's where I think it gets really, really interesting.
Yeah. I want to just ask, whenever you've lost someone in your life, does knowing all the research that does that help you with your grief?
It does change. It changes the way you look at it. It definitely changes the way you see it. It's going to be sad no matter what. It's sad to lose someone. So, that's kind of unavoidable. But the difference in interpretation of the event is pretty radical. So, for someone who doesn't have any kind of a belief, and this is where I think religion's actually useful. If that's where somebody's at, and that's like the most kind of, I don't know, realistic version of reality that they can manage at that moment, I think it's better than being an atheist materialist, because from that position you have zero hope. You have, there's no expectation of any. There's no silver lining. It's like, well, I've lost them. They don't even exist anymore. They're done. And I'm next. So it hits differently. It doesn't have that level of severity and like the existential severity to it, where now we can look at it and just go, look, okay, this is sad. I'm confident that they are in a much better condition now than the rest of us are.
So this is I think all these questions are kind of deep, but are you scared to die? And let me kind of just add another piece to that question. Are you scared to die? And are you like not looking forward to dying? Because that's not the way I want to say it, but are you looking forward to finding out what really happens, like after you die? Like, do you think about that?
Yeah, I think everything I do is kind of preparation for that. That's I remember reading in one of it might have been Human Design or something, that my design is kind of wired like that. So yeah, I feel like that's like I'm interested in the nature of reality, and I'm trying to make sense of things, but at the same time I'm preparing for my own death. And so there's always been a part of me, even from the moment that I had the infinite consciousness experience, there's always been the doubting part, the part that goes, well, maybe it's not what you think. And so I think part of me has been driven to try to silence that part, or to at least make that voice sound as ridiculous as possible when he does pipe up. So yeah, I feel like I do have that kind of like looking forward to it aspect. Like I'm not ready to go yet, but I've seen a good deal of kind of what the other side looks like from 23 years of research, and it looks pretty amazing. We have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. Like I also think that this talking with people like you and doing this podcast is also made me not afraid to die. Like I'm scared of how I'm going to, like, I don't want to die in a car accident or get suffer for years of dying from some type of virus or disease or something. But I'm not saying I want to die now either, but I am looking forward to seeing what it's all about whenever it happens. So, I mean, I do think about that.
Yeah.
Not every day, but I do think about it.
Yeah, I find it weird when people don't think about it. I'm like, what are you?
Yeah.
You think you're avoiding this somehow?
It's funny. My mom is getting older, and I just went to go visit her in June. And one of the things that she asked me, she says, if I'm in my late 80s and I've lived my full life and I'm really miserable and not feeling well, what would you think if I committed suicide? And I said, if you are not happy and you wanted to do that, like I would support it. You got to tell me before you do it. Like you can't just do it and I find out.
Right.
And she says, well, do you think I would go to hell for it? I'm like, there's not a hell. Like she still believes in heaven and hell in some aspects. At least she won't admit that she still says she does, but I know kind of deep down all the conversation we have, she doesn't totally believe it anymore. But I'm like, I think it's fine. I said, I'll see you again at some point somehow. But you can't just like do it.
Yeah.
She'd probably not be happy that I'm saying this on my podcast, but she doesn't listen to it, so she'll never know. But
we can edit this out later.
Yeah, maybe we will. No, we'll probably leave it in actually.
Sorry, Mom. Yeah. I mean, I kind of take a similar, attitude. I have a similar attitude to it. I think if someone's in a state of like irreversible suffering that you can't do anything with, I mean, why would you want to force them to endure that? It doesn't, it doesn't make sense to me. So, yeah, I mean, the release into the non-physical, by all accounts, aside from the sociopaths among us, most normal people have an unbelievably incredible, blissful, beautiful transition, and then from there, it just gets better.
Yeah. Do you think that's what it is when you get there? Like, I mean, you hear all these stories about, it's so peaceful, unconditional love. It's amazing. Everything is perfect. Do you think that's what it really is?
Well, what it is what the individual allows it to be or makes it. So, it can be. I mean, even for a lot of people who didn't have much of an interest in these types of things, you'll hear them say it was the greatest experience of my life. And a lot of atheists who may have even had an unpleasant initial stage of the NDE, where it then progressed into something really beautiful, they'll tell you the same thing. And it's actually turned a lot of those people into much better human beings.
Yeah.
It has measurable kind of impacts on people. The depth of like possibility is really, we can't even convey it in words. We can't capture it. It's what's waiting there is so nuanced and so expansive. I mean, by all accounts, it's just incredible. And what's interesting is most NDE reports emanate from what I would consider to be kind of like mid to high astral planes, low mental planes. Some people go a little deeper than that. But even those people who go to those lower levels, they say the same thing. They're just like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing. Why am I back here in my body? I can't even tell you how amazing this was. It was just like going home. The word home gets used a lot. So yeah, I mean, the possibilities are very basically endless. So it's really the individual's configuration that dictates where they go.
Yeah. So I want to ask you kind of like I guess there's no crazy questions, but do you think that you always hear that when I've watched videos and done research on this, it's always that Earth is the hardest place to come to, or it's the one where you learn the most. And so do you think that we are able to go to other planets, other places? And do you think that Earth is like the place where people come to learn valuable lessons? Have you heard that theory before?
Yeah, it's pretty common. I think there's probably some truth in it. The general consensus is that the post-mortem or in-between lives environment is far more pleasant and enjoyable, and that this is the hardest kind of environment available. There are a lot of reports of people having lifetimes on other planets, other worlds that are less intense, less difficult. There's a tension between Earth may be kind of like the only game in town in a sense, and from these altered states or from the field of consciousness, we may be kind of like downloading other ideas about different modes of existence, of visiting other worlds, other lifetimes. The reality of those is, I guess, up for discussion and debate. Definitely when people have the experience in a regression, for example, they find it absolutely realistic and persuasive. The alien theme, like that being an alien, so to speak, on another world, having those other experiences, seems to have only come up in the last, I guess, 40, 50 years. Mm-hmm. Before that, I really can't find it being talked about anywhere in the literature. And that follows on from, Aleister Crowley doing his I forget the name of the working, his ritual that involved a being called Lamb, which conjuring a being called Lamb, which looked, funnily enough, a lot like what we now call the grey alien types, except that term didn't exist back then. And then shortly after that, we had just kind of this idea exploded into the collective. And so, to me, there's a feedback loop between the individual and the collective field. And we put ideas into the field and somebody else can pick them up. And I think there's a lot of that going on. And so when people are saying, I got this download, or, I had an encounter with aliens in my dream or my out-of-body experience or what have you, I'm generally very, very skeptical of a lot of that, because I've seen the ways that consciousness can deceive itself and the ways it can render an environment around it that seems completely and utterly realistic, and which ultimately isn't, or maybe completely illusory. It may be absurd. And so, it just opens up a huge can of worms. I actually prefer people read what I've written than my incoherent ramblings about it on a podcast, because it needs to be approached in a kind of methodical way. Like, here's this next thing, and then these things make sense of the next bit, and that kind of thing, like contextualizing things for people, because we have this, and I pull this apart in detail in the book. We have this, what we call in the esoteric world, there's this term manas. Manas is the mind or human soul principle, and we're operating through this, basically all the time until we're not. But most of the reports that we get from NDEs or from people who are saying they were channeling aliens or experiencing aliens in the out-of-body state, this all is filtered through manas, the monastic principle, which is the human mind, essentially, the conditioned human mind. And so we have this monastic field that we're all immersed in, like fish in water. And this information is shared among us. And so when we go into these altered states, we can program into, we don't even have to be in an altered state. We can do it right here and now. We can program into the field ideas about things. We could maybe create a thought form of, a 90-foot tall purple octopus alien, and then, someone else might actually tune in and pick up on that and have an interaction with it and think that, we've discovered a new species of alien kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think this is actually kind of, that's a silly example, but that the essence of that is actually the process that's happening. So we've got this really interesting mythopoetic process where we're generating these myths through the collective field, and then it becomes the issue there then becomes really, how do we discern illusion from what's not illusory? And that's a study in itself, and it's a tricky thing. But I've pulled on that thread in the book a lot in the back section of it, because it's critical that people understand this stuff in order to be able to frame and interpret certain data and reports and experiences that they might be having. Yeah.
My last question for you is, if there was one question that you could pick to have answered, from the higher source or whatever, what would that one question be?
Why did it take me so long to find Zach? I don't have a clue. I don't know what I'd ask. I really don't. Can I have a vacation, maybe?
Yeah. Well, I again, when I told you that this is the beginning of the interview, like I was so happy that you made time to come on, and because the research and the work that you're doing is amazing. I will put your website in the description of this podcast or video. It's brendanmurphy.com. I will put links to your book, and I hope I get to see you speak at some point in person, because I think that what you're doing is really, really amazing, and I'm really, again, so honored that I got to interview you. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Zach, and thanks for having me and taking the time. And you did ask earlier in the interview if I teach people meditation or anything. I don't teach meditation, but if they want to work with me, they should check out the Evolve Yourself masterclass at evolveyourself.live.
Great. I'll put that in the description of the podcast too, so people can know to go there. So
awesome.
Thanks so much for being on. And if this episode resonated with you and you think somebody else should hear it, please share it with them and leave a comment and what you thought about the episode. And I'll put your social media on there too. I think I have it. Is it Instagram and what?
Yeah, it's Substack's also good.
Okay, I'll put them all on there so people can come and check it all out. So thanks again for being on, Brendan.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.